can the country put in place mechanisms to spur economic growth? Less than a week before NTV hosts the Economic Summit, which has become a staple for economists who are keen on development, this year's theme focuses on key policy triggers for planned growth with jobs in Uganda. Could the nexus between good governance, accountability, and industrialization spur the country to the lofty heights of economic growth? On the spot tonight is a panel. We have a panel of three, including Professor Gerard Karija, NSSF Deputy Managing Director Patrick Ayota, and Abubakar Mayanja, an economist. Gentlemen, a warm welcome. You are, all of you now, the spotlight is on you, so I should say you're on the spot. As NTV, we are preparing this Economic Summit 2018, but we had an Economic Summit for 2017, which focused on integrated planning to harness infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and social services. If I may begin with you, Abubakar, what is the report card a year after the summit?
The report card on the area of infrastructure is quite positive with the recent launch of the bridge at the Nile, which will do a lot. Then on energy, there is some new dams that are coming in that are going to substantially increase the supply. I don't know whether they will do something about the price of energy as well. As you might be aware, Uganda's energy price is quite high at 15.3 US cents as of 2016. It's the highest in East Africa. We have also Kenya coming in at 15, Tanzania 9.8 cents, and Ethiopia at 3 cents. When it comes to agriculture, a lot of agriculture is rain-fed, and we have had a good year of rains. So the anticipation is that if it didn't do anything bad to the farm, there's likely to be increased output. We are likely to see higher growth. We can go later into the details. There are some things that haven't gone well, like the standard gauge railway, mainly around the issues of the amount of money we need. Then the other area where we still have a challenge is building the midstream for the nascent oil and gas sector, where we are yet to have certainty on the funding for the midstream. Like I've always argued, you cannot develop the oil and gas sector when the midstream, which is the pipelines, are not developed. We still have an opportunity on the energy side. The areas of Soroti and Karamoja globally have potentially the highest potential for production of renewable energy, ahead of those guys in the deserts, of course. And fortunately for us today, we have Mr. Ayota here from NSSF. We can talk a little bit about whether they now have capacity to enter some infrastructure funding. I'll get a little bit later into that.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, you talk about tariffs, electricity. Yes, we are building the dams. Karuma maybe is coming online soon. Maybe Agago will also come online. Maybe Isimba and many others that are planned. But the cost of electricity is high, and yet if you want to transform a country, people must have electricity. What is the way out of this problem? Because if Ethiopia is at 3, you said 3.5. And they are ready. They are building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. They are ready actually to supply electricity all over East Africa, and ours is so costly. How do we get out of this?
I think it will be a bit tough because of the way we funded our electricity to begin with. If you remember, electricity in this country back in 1985, 90s, I mean, nobody wanted to touch that sector because nobody was willing to put any money. The country didn't have any money. So we went on for quite expensive funding, which we are still burdened with. Now, the negotiation that took place recently, hopefully we'll learn a little bit about that. But I think once that funding phase is done, the good thing funding is temporary, then we begin to have it at a cost that we can actually afford and make it better for the country. Sometimes we are kind of hard on ourselves. We kind of forget where we came from and what the country faced. That to get to where we needed to be, it's like you go out there, you find a madman. nobody wants to touch that madman. And somehow you bathe the guy, you give him a nice suit. Now everybody now says, okay, this is a nice suit, but why are we paying so much for this nice suit? Because where we came from. And I think we're still going to have to pay for that until we get rid of that funding. Because that's what's actually tying our hands down. Now the question, can we pay it off very quickly? The other priorities that we are struggling with, you just mentioned the SGR. So you're trying to figure out, okay, the little money that we get, should we pay off that debt?
You're managing a fund that soon will be hitting about 20 trillion Uganda shillings.
Yes.
So why don't you, it's our money when
That's
we're
true.
here. Why don't you venture into that and maybe electricity generation and stuff like that and save us? Because we have a money, 20 trillion Uganda shillings is a lot of money.
Yes.
And in the fund that you manage.
20 trillion, we hope to be there by 2025. We are 10 trillion, which is still a lot of money.
Yeah.
But we are still investing in this economy. I mean, out of that 20 trillion, out of that 10 trillion shillings, do you know that about 6 trillion of shillings is actually invested in treasury bonds with the Uganda government? So we're actually funding.
You have chosen to go to a sector which can play it safe. Treasury bonds, because you can't go wrong there. No. Why don't you go into real things, that industry and factories and stuff like that, so that you can have many people employed there, and then many people again saving with you?
But Patrick, it's your money, which means I better make sure I play safe with it, because the day you want your money, you better make sure you get it. Now,
business is about taking a risk, sir.
That's true.
So why are you scared of taking the risk?
No, there's a level of risk as a member you expect of me.
So you think in this economy you cannot take a risk?
No. Actually, there is a proposal we've put on the table. But if we did that, then we can deploy NSF money to do any development in this country, whether it is health, education, or industry. And that's a simple thing.
You've put a lot of money in Safaricom in Kenya?
No, yes.
Haven't you?
No, we have. No, we have. But that's called diversification. You diversify your economy. What we've actually told, and we shared this with the government, is let's do this. Instead of us just buying a treasury bond, let the government issue an infrastructure bond. So now you deploy that money specific to that infrastructure project, to health project, to education, using local money. But behind it is basically government backing for it.
Professor Kareja, the Ethiopians are building a dam of 6,000 megawatts on the River Nile at a cost of almost $4 billion. We are building a dam of 600 megawatts, also 600 megawatts, also on the Nile, at almost half the cost of the guys who are building 6,000 megawatts. What went wrong, you think? How can we be as if cheated to this extent?
Well, I think broadly, government is the biggest spender. And very many people who would like to do business or to access money, they look at government money and government projects. And in the last few years, there is a lot of thrust on infrastructure development, which calls for very heavy expenditure. But I think that even the principal, that is the president, has become very alert concerning the high cost of infrastructure development. We have seen, for example, the standard gauge railway being revised downwards. So I think that either out of deliberate will and effort by designers and different actors to see how they optimize benefit or profit, for that matter, against the hunger for infrastructural development. So there is that balance. And I think some people are taking advantage of that, and the government is becoming more alert about it. So I think it's really not only about dams, but the whole government expenditure system. And I think that they have started facing constraints. The Ugandan state is feeling the constraint of public expenditure, the cost of debt, and so on. So a lot of measures actually are being done to increase control, to minimize leakage, and to have value for money. But I think it is because of, one, the comparative nature of what is happening elsewhere within the community and beyond.
Abubakar, for Uganda to grow at a sustainable rate, we must ensure moderate debt levels. Good governance and accountability should ensure that we borrow for projects that are a priority to the country. For instance, do we really need the standard gauge railway? And have we examined the cost benefit?
There are some challenges about the cost benefit analysis, but on that one I want to give a straight answer that we need it because we're trying to compete in global markets, and like I've always said, if you don't have a working transport and logistics sector, you don't have an economy. And this was an argument of Adam Smith, reason being that it brings in the intermediates and the raw materials and takes the final goods. So when you add $4,000 to a container, it becomes uncompetitive in global markets. But to put things in perspective, when it comes to things like the standard gauge railway, right now the worry is that we've started to hit debt levels that are worrying. My analysts have showed me that Uganda has actually, although I'm yet to prove the numbers, gone above 50% of debt, the debt to GDP ratio. When you
the minister says we're at 38%.
When you add on committed debt, which has been committed but not yet disbursed. And also, I've also been not one of those people that like the debt to GDP ratio. Instead, I would like to look at the debt to revenue ratio, public sector revenues, because that is where you get the money to pay from. So the short answer to your question is yes, we need the standard gauge railway, but we seem to be having challenges with the fiscal room.
So you're talking the debt revenue ratio, if you look at it from that perspective, then we are really, really in a bad shape.
In other words, this industrialization that we are talking about today, a historical perspective might be useful. It started out of England in the 18th to the 19th century. And the key drivers of it were people moving from rural areas to go to cities. And key elements that enabled England to sprout out faster than all the other nations was iron. They had iron deposits. I'm reliably informed that we have significant iron deposits where Professor Karija comes from, in Muko. And so if we had developed those, it would have been cheaper for us to build the standard gauge railway because industrialization came out of steel. When it comes to transport and logistics, England had harbors and navigable rivers that were faster. So people started moving out of rural areas and into factories, and then they created the space for commercial agriculture to take place. It then moved to the United States, the northern parts. Again, the same key elements. One of the wealthiest people of the time, Dale Carnegie, built a steel industry. And then, of course, J.P. Morgan put together U.S. Steel. So to come back home for industrialization to happen, we have opportunities. Yeah, the first opportunity is that we can generate sufficient renewable energy because of the rivers that we have and the power that we can generate from, say, Soroti or Karamoja. So that
but remember, the rivers that we have depend on the hydrology of our hydrology. We are busy destroying our forests. And in fact, Uganda's forest cover has dwindled so much. And the next couple of years, even those rivers could dry. And we may even run into trouble. But still on the railway,
yes.
If we built a standard gauge railway and took it maybe to Pakwacho, took it for Port or Kasese, what are we going to get from there and take to Mombasa?
One of the most interesting arguments that has been is whether or not you should have the infrastructure in place before you have the economic development. And there are people who have argued, see, the economy is fast before you put the infrastructure. But the economies globally, what they've done always is you put the infrastructure first, because eventually there will be economic activity
around there. So you're hoping that eventually people will start investing into agriculture, and then we'll have this railway will have to carry.
No, it's not really a hope, because what happens, it opens up an area. It opens up an unreachable area, and people then began to utilize value from there.
Just a few months ago, last year, actually even this year, we had a bumper harvest of maize. And we produced, I'm told, about almost 4 million metric tons of maize. But people made a loss. And in fact, Kenya rejected our maize because they suspect our post-handling methods are so bad that could be having aflatoxins. So, I mean, we even have our agriculture wrong. We cannot even handle our harvest well. And they have rejected our maize. And if that is the stamp they have put on our produce, it is a scar on us.
Yeah, that is specific to maize, but I think the whole concept of infrastructural development applies. The reason why we have the state is because us as individuals or collectively, there are certain things we cannot do, but they must be in place. So many times the state has to invest, not because of the cost-benefit analysis. No. Government is not necessarily there to make profit or to see whether the road will bring more benefits, because there is need for mobility. There is a need for the value chain to be cleared. When people plant their crops, they need to be assured of a price and a market. So the whole concept of infrastructure in Uganda should be broadened beyond roads and railways to go into irrigation, to go into value chains, to go into storage. So the investment by both public, private, and other interested actors, unless that basic platform is in place, we shall have those challenges of grains not being well managed. We shall have technical institutes where people are supposed to study agriculture and they are not going there. They are preferring to do a degree in social sciences. Not that it is bad. I am one of the graduates. So it's a whole, it is a systemic issue. So in order for all this to be secured, it's more about an integrated way of looking at things than looking at elements in an isolated manner. So that integration of policy, I think policy integration is one thing that we are yet to strengthen as a country.
Bakr, physical discipline remains a virtue that few are ready to practice. I'll give you an example. We continue to spend lavishly on four-wheel vehicles, foreign travel, and all these workshops. Who are those ready to ride the moral high horse?
Yeah, one of the biggest dilemmas that we have, again, we go to history here. I keep talking about history because recently my daughter told me something I didn't know she knew. She told me those who don't learn from the lessons of history are bound to repeat it. So to put things is policy, like Professor Karejan knows, is not always determined by people who are more knowledgeable or the best knowledgeable people or the academics at the universities. They are determined by politicians. And to put things into perspective, Uganda's management has legislature at 0.47 trillion, okay, 0.47 billion. Then it has accountability sector at 1.2 trillion. Then it has public sector management, 1.2 trillion. Then it has public administration. I've seen they've been juggling and breaking it up in parts. The total of it is 3.66 billion, which is, 3.66 trillion, which is $1 billion. Now, how much money did they say we need for the standard gauge railway? That means every 2 years we build a standard gauge railway. Number one. We are spending $1 billion on public sector administration and management. It's politics. And now politics sometimes doesn't lend itself well to reason, because you don't know what they are maximizing. And one of my favorite writers on politics is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote a book called The Social Contract. And half of the time, the choices made by the government are not in favor of the sovereign. But we can't talk about politics without talking about the French Revolution as well. These republics, as you see them, emanate out of that event when Maria Antoinette said something and sparked off a riot in France, and republics came. When republics came to Africa, they were coming out of colonialism, and the people who took over at the time did not manage them well. I don't want to go into the details of all the chaos all the way from Egypt down to South Africa, but the short point to make is that, for example, can you tell whether the NRM is a right-wing party? Meaning that, what are the contradictions? We had major privatization. We had a restructuring of government when it came in to reduce. Professor Kareja probably knows this better than me, can confirm, to make the government smaller. Now, as you know, for example, the Republican Party in the US has lower taxes and a smaller government. Then you have the Conservative Party, which are right-wing parties. And indeed, we've studied the nexus between those choices and what the outcomes of governments are. So if you have a government that spends $1 billion US dollars every year on management and administration, and then it runs and says, okay, we lack money to build a standard gauge railway. Therein lies the contradiction or the conundrum that even I probably am not able to solve.
So in other words...
And so just to finish, you can't tell whether even the alternatives that you have, whether they're going to do something about it. You don't know whether FDC is a right-wing party. So to put things into perspectives, politics has a direct impact on economics. Unfortunately, most economists never make it to the table of decision-making. But Professor Kareja can throw more light for us whether, from his expertise in public administration, why do we, for example, in Uganda, spend $1 billion? And I've given you the addition that there's accountability, legislature, public sector management, and public administration. That's before you add security and defense. Security is very important for economics and defense, so that's defendable. But if you add security, which is 1.5 trillion, I don't know the figure for defense, you're going to end up with most likely something like $2 billion every year. And so for an economy that is trying to industrialize, where people are moving from rural areas, you starve certain institutions that I want to mention that are important, like the Uganda Industrial Research Institute. I've been there and seen that they have done some fantastic work. I know that the Uganda National Bureau of Standards, which is very important for the technical barriers of trade you are talking about, Europe will not just take your food, the aflatoxins, these phytosanitary standards. But if the Uganda National Bureau of Standards is found here in Nakawa, how much food production goes on in Nakawa, for example?
Okay.
So extension services.
If I can just maybe sum it up, is that the cost of public administration is so high in this country. We are actually putting money in consumption than production.
Yes.
So we have our economics wrong.
Yes. And that's very true. I mean, when you look at the public sector, just the creation of districts that even are non-viable. And with each district comes layers and layers of, I would call it, non-productive activity. And as you said, you rob then a country the resources you would put into the productive projects to support the overheads created by these bureaucracies. And I think that is not, that actually is the wrong economics for the country in terms of what we need. But on the other hand, there is where then the argument is made that then you need more representation, that actually makes it more, brings services more closer to the people, except most of these institutions don't actually have any services to offer because they don't have the resources to actually apply to this. So there is a bit of a conundrum that we're facing as a country that we need to get away from and actually try to narrow the public spending space so it can be those resources can be redeployed into the productive projects that the country needs.
Professor Kareja, many countries that have developed, including the Asian tigers, have relied on research to harness technology and improve the livelihoods of their citizens. Why are we as a country not keen to fund research that waste billions on what I could call clientele patronage kind of politics?
You'll be told that we spend on research, but the question is how much and for what purpose. As a country, we don't have a clear national research agenda to begin with. So we have a lot of research going on, narrow for agriculture, livestock, in higher education institutions, in very many private and public institutions. But all this, it does not feed into a national agenda. So to begin with, we don't have a clear national research agenda. Two, most of the research that is taking place in this country is inspired largely by interests that are foreign to this country, be they research in institutions and research centers or even in government establishments. So a lot of research is going on, but it serves a different agenda. Then we have ad hoc and sporadic efforts from the presidency supporting some research initiatives. And one sometimes asks whether they are just experiments or possibilities for
example, the banana initiative, the presidential initiative. Banana
and many others, the vehicle and so on and so forth. So then you'll find the whole higher education sector. In many countries, actually, higher education, the higher you go, the more it should be expensive and the more the state subsidizes it. Even in South Africa, very few people can afford to pay for their PhDs. So most PhDs are supported by the state. But the amount of money that is given to public institutions to conduct research, like in the academia, doesn't exceed 3%. So that shows our priority. And leave alone scientific research. We are now in an era of evidence-based or evidence-influenced or evidence-informed policy making. Other than the Uganda National Health Organization, research organization, which partly supports Ministry of Health, and then the Economic Policy Research Center, which partly supports the Ministry of Finance, you will not find many policy making bodies or designers of policy or policy analysts for that matter who have a link, a direct link to research efforts to feed into their policies. And you know, when all this is done, when it comes to those whose duty is to establish policies, which is cabinet, and laws, which is parliament, they would need as much evidence-informed as possible. So we give them, the policy analysts give them less informed, and as you know, theirs is to express the will of the people. So, as Mr. Mayanja said, they can even just take note. I mean, when cabinet decisions are being made, they can take note, it can be information, it can be take action and whatever. But whatever decision they take, which is their preserve, should be informed by research. So the idea that as a country, we do not have a clear research agenda, we do not set aside deliberately amount of money to be into research for science, innovation, and design, it limits our ability actually to move forward.
Then how do you reconcile the fact that in this country, we are so good at making some policies that have found, if implemented, to work miracles? So it means if we're putting so little, but we're able to come up, in fact, we could be like the startup capital for policy makers.
This is what they call the implementation gap, where those who design the policy and those who actually implement it understand the policy differently.
There was a joke, or maybe it's true thing, that when a Ugandan technical person goes to make maybe a presentation like in Nairobi, that those guys will be waiting for that paper, because they know when a Ugandan puts together a paper, you know, of how things should move, it is well designed. So only that they know we cannot implement, But for them, they are waiting just to pick it, and then they go and implement the latter. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be looking at the issues of integrity, because we seem to have an integrity deficit. What does that say about our economic development? We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guest tonight, I have Mr. Bakar Mayanja and Mr. Patrick Ayota and Professor Gerard Karija. Professor Karija, if I may begin with you in this segment. We are a country with an abundance of resources. However, we are facing a moral crisis as corruption remains Uganda's Achilles heel. Is there a likelihood that if we improved in accountability, we could really leave room for industrialization?
That's definite. Uganda has a very elaborate ethical infrastructure with the institutions, with the whole sector, accountability sector, which I believe is getting stronger. But it seems that competition is also getting, corruption is also competing with the development in fighting it. So it appears to me that there is need for deliberate, increased political commitment to the fight against corruption. I'll just use a few illustrations. The Inspector General of Government has several times said that I need a little funding, I need assets to be frozen, and so on and so forth. So we need to see that carried through. The other one is the relationship between the different agencies, judiciary, the presidency, and these anti-corruption agencies. I wouldn't expect to see increased exchange of words between the Chief Justice and, for example, the Inspector General of Government. I would rather, as a citizen, see more of assurance on how they are going to work together to ensure that corruption cases are speedily handled. So the whole question is that we have agencies, we have people, but we have an integrity deficit, and we have corruption. There are a lot of studies, both by government and outside government. There is erosion of trust in particular government institutions from the integrity surveys that government conducts. So
are these agencies not up to the task?
I think some of them are up to the task, but
why do we still have to see a hemorrhage of public resources through corrupt ways?
Some of them are not up to the task, and part of it is structural. For example, you cannot underfund investigations and expect good reports. You cannot have certain agencies intertwined, and they need a certain level of autonomy. For example, the DPP's office, the crime intelligence, there is a way they are configured that if they were done differently, like how you see FBI and so on, each clearly having its own high level of autonomy, it would be different. But also beyond that, it tells us about us as a population, as a people. Why do we have a moral erosion? Is it the stage of development we are at? Is it the big gap between those who have and those who do not? Is it because of the systems that do not conclude cases of high and systemic corruption? So I think it's a multiplicity of things, but what is clear is that there's a lot of dissatisfaction, there's a lot of distrust, and there is preference of public resources, and some of it is corruption, but there's also absolute wastage, which sometimes we may not confront and focus more on abuse, but there is also wastage which maybe we need to redefine actually what corruption is.
Mr. Yote.
I think this whole thing about ethical behavior and corruption, I mean, the fact is this, in this country, the missing thing is what you actually mentioned, accountability for public resources. We don't do that. In institutions where that is applied, you find actually the institutions are thriving. I'm going to give you my example of my own institution, NSSF. NSSF, we have got a culture that's very intolerant of any behavior that we think is bad. I mean, we are hard on it. And every employee in NSF knows that. That's why you can go to NSF and get your service for
but
free
because
and so
you have
on.
learned the hard way, haven't you?
That's true. But we hold people accountable.
At one time, we were former managing director to be imprisoned because of some
but that's the point. There's accountability that's there. The day in this country we are serious with accountability and don't give excuses for corruption, whether they because most of the people who are stealing, we know them. We even know how much they've stolen. They go back in the village, the villagers applaud them. Even in the village, we feel that it's okay for you to steal. But the day we are actually serious with being accountable and say, no, it's not right for you to steal government resources, we'll come for you. It's not right for you to take anything that doesn't belong to you, we'll come for you. Any institution that does that, as a country, will grow. You gave examples of Ethiopia. They are just intolerant. They don't have the political space by then, but they're intolerant of anybody being corrupt. So what happens? The resources are then channeled towards what needs to be done. And that's what we need in this country.
Do we need to go the China way in fighting corruption? And I mean the China way because in some cases people could be hanged.
No, we don't need to go the China way. Our approach for dealing with integrity and accountability issues is to use capital markets. And I would like to expound on that a bit. When you go through fuzzy, budget financing for productive assets, and okay, just to take you a little bit back, to build GDP, the binding constraint is savings and investment. And investment has two components. It's got public sector investment and private investment. When private sector investment lags or goes faster and public sector investment is not happening because of leakages, the economy is strangled. So starting with the investment and saving system of Uganda, we have a binding constraint. Fortunately, you have somebody from the NSSF here. And I've always argued, and I'll say it again, that if we put our savings into NSSF for long-term purposes, I don't think that I'll ever get to see my money until after so many years. The expectation is that NSSF would invest in us. By us, I mean dams, because it's our money. By us, I mean hospitals. By us, I mean, why shouldn't municipalities that are big enough like Wachiso have their own waterworks and their own electricity works? Now, the instrument that governs the connection between a funder like NSSF and the project is called a financial instrument. In Uganda, the prevalent one is probably government funding. But we can use bonds, because bonds force you to go to the market and the project becomes independent. So, for example, Arua municipality could build a stadium, but that stadium, they issue a bond. NSSF can bankroll them, but NSSF would like its investments to have sufficient liquidity. And what raising money from markets does, it forces discipline. And I've had a personal experience in Uganda where I was one of the first people, actually I was the first person to talk about municipal bonds, because I wanted to get funding out of the central government and put it at the district level. I wrote a paper on it when I was still at the Economic Policy Research Center. After so much effort, when it didn't work out, they tell me later after 5 years that actually, Abu, the problem was not your proposal. The problem is that people could not see where they can eat from. And I was so disheartened. Now, the challenge I have with the current investment and saving infrastructure in Uganda is that when you have long-term savings going into short-term instruments, treasury bills, where it's even worse, they're for monetary policy. This is voodoo economics. Why? I put my money in NSSF. They pay me interest. And then they charge me tax to pay me interest. But that money has not added to productive capacity, either from a public sector perspective or a private sector perspective. That's number one.
He's playing safe.
However, let me finish.
Actually,
when we go the bond market, when we allow Entebbe municipality, I'll give a very live example. Entebbe municipality houses the airport. They have a rental. At the time I looked at the statistics, they used to get about 300 million shillings every year from the airport. It is possible for Mr. Iota here to say, okay, Entebbe municipality, this is the binding productive asset that you need that is cash flow generating. This is very important. Cash flow generating. I'm not talking about funding cars for the LC5 chairman. I'm talking about product. Let's use something as simple as a sports facility. As you might be aware, Entebbe houses the UN. It houses the airport. It houses the president's office, which means there's a lot of stuff. But do they have a recreational place that is affordable, that has got football, that has got cricket, that has got a stadium? So, for example, we could probably go to Entebbe to watch a football match. But that is an infrastructure that generates income. Now, when you try to fund that through the budget of the district, you open it up to delays in procurement, influence peddling. But when you structure it as a bond, it can interest him a bit, provided you're not guaranteeing that loan with the property of the municipality. It's called a general.
You have about 10 trillion shillings.
I think he raised the point that I started off with. Yes, we want to invest, but using instruments that exactly bring that discipline. For example, if you ask NSF to go put money in a dam, what capacity, what knowledge, what experience do we have in managing dams? But we can manage instruments that finance that dam. That was the beginning from. And let me tell you something which you'll be shocked. We tried actually to do those. KCCA tried to do a municipal bond about, I think, 3-4 years ago. We actually argued that because bonds are expensive, let the municipalities come together. Entebbe, Mukono, Jinja, and Kampala come together. Then you have this mega bond, which because of course now becomes affordable. So that now you can issue that municipal bond, and out of it, you can now fund a number of the developed projects that you need there. I don't know where it went to, but one of the biggest problems was even the credit rating of some of the municipalities could not get the bar together. So there are internal things that you have to even fix before you even can bring a bond to bear. You talk about Entebbe, you talk about the airport, and you talk about cash flows at the airport. Do you think the municipality owns the cash flows at that airport?
Yes.
They don't.
Not the cash flows of the airport.
Because what's the most lucrative thing in an airport?
Let me answer you.
What's the most lucrative thing in an airport?
You see, you're not going for lucrative. I think
I'm talking from a cash flow perspective.
Yeah.
What generates cash flows in airports?
Of course, they pay parking fees.
Handling.
Yeah.
That's managed by who? That's actually owned by who? By Entebbe municipality.
In-house.
So,
until
you restructure some of these things.
Let me respond to him. First of all, KCCA's structure changed. It changed from being a standard. Professor Karija is here. It's changed from being a standalone municipality, body corporate, to a government agency. It can no longer, therefore, qualify as KCCA to get what might be called in technical terms, just a minute, a general obligation bond.
No, but it can do a purpose bond. It can do a project bond.
Exactly. I agree with you on that. It can do a project bond. But therefore, where I don't agree with you, the credit analysis is not on KCCA anymore. It's a direct pass-through to the credentials of the project. Now, let me come back to Entebbe. Entebbe does not own handling cash flows. It does not own parking fees. But that ground rent of that place is paid, and it's a predictable cash flow that is amortizable, that can allow NSSF to look at that cash flow. Because one thing we need to understand about municipal finance is that you can never attach the property of a municipality. Therefore, the only thing that you have as collateral is a pledge or a lien on a given cash flow. But then I thought here we are talking mainly about industrialization. I have had familiar contact with savings institutions abroad that have different tiers of their capital. They say, okay, we are here to safeguard savings. We are going to take very conservative investment for 60%. We're going to take medium risk for 30%. And for 10%, they even outsource. When you see BlackRock here investing in Bujagali Energy, go check again, see where their money comes from. Just a minute. You're going to find there Jersey of the US is an indirect shareholder in Bujagali. So we would like you people to first get out of and look at certain ratios to allow investment to flow. What is the bank interest rate? 25%. Industrialists cannot use that money.
I think let me help him a bit.
Thank you.
Even that principle you just mentioned, even within this country, it's there from a perspective of this. You got what you got to investment policy. It says, okay, for us now in Uganda, 70%, that's the investment policy, should be in government bonds, your safety. Then you've got about 25% in equity, which is a bit riskier than bonds. And then you've got about 6-7% in real estate, which is the most risky. So there's a diversification even within here that we practice to bring that to bear. So the very principle you're talking about, we're actually practicing it in this country with an SSF.
To add to that, Mr. Kamara, to add to that, because we're talking about industrialization, and I did tell you about the history and why it's very important, how people are coming from the areas. You have to start at the micro level. The micro level is at the level of the farm, the producer. The most important thing to them are factor costs, which is the cost of power and the cost of labor. Right. What is the situation in Uganda? We have abundant labor that is not costly, but our power is expensive. Exactly. Therefore, then you go to the policy level. Okay, I've jumped the meso level, institutional level. What Professor Karija was talking about, we have institutes that are supposed to come up with policies and R&D, research and development. You're talking about Uganda Industrial Research Institute, Food Science and Technology. When they discover new ways of doing things, we can produce more efficiently at a cost that can enable us to compete with Kenya, with Tanzania. And as you know, we don't have harbors, so we'll have to work harder there. When you go to the macro level, policy level, it's an issue of fiscal and monetary policy. For example, the same way they have an agriculture fund, agriculture SCP fund in the Bank of Uganda at 12%, which is below the market rate, that's a policy geared towards changing the price of accessing money for agro production. Now, why don't you extend that to industrialization if you're serious about it?
Secondly, there's the Uganda Development Bank.
Uganda Development Bank,
which has been capitalized.
Uganda Development Bank now has money relatively well priced from the Islamic Development Bank for capital to acquire machinery of up to, they have up to $100 million. Actually, the total is about 200 if you add on the one they got from Badea. Then there is the Uganda Energy Capitalization Company under the Ministry of Energy that has some equity funding for dams. Then we have some money.
So we have the money?
No, I'm not saying that we have all the money.
Yeah, but how many are actually going to Uganda Development Bank to access that money?
The issue has been information, because I also found out not so long ago, and I've sent a few people there and worked on a few applications. However, I want to go back to, because Mr. Ayota here has huge responsibility in my view. Now, the fiscal policy is tax. As you might be aware, Uganda came up with special economic zone policy. We were about 10, 20 years late. But you can see there's an effort from government to say that if you're an exporter and you locate in a special economic zone, your tax regime is different. However, we've had some challenges because we also have to deal with the regional level, whereby now what would have been, Kenya and Tanzania are not now considered export markets. So it's a big challenge.
Before we take a break, we see a government eager to grant subsidies and tax holidays to foreign farms. Does this not send local farmers that pay high taxes and cost out of business.
You may even add to protect, provide security.
Yeah.
I think it's good to provide incentives for investment, but if it is perceived to be inequitable, that it is favoring a particular category, then that becomes an issue. But as a principle, to increase incentives for those who want to save, to those who want to invest, to me is okay. Two, to link it also with corruption. We know that most of the corruption goes into business, some people, when they get involved in corrupt practices, they go into property. These days, some things are becoming fashionable, lifestyle audits. So instead of making people declare their property, you make property declare their owners, and then you unveil them. People have talked about qualities of being leaders. We are so preoccupied with qualifications that you need A level to become a legislator. Some of us actually think otherwise. You may have a very good legislator who is even an O-level graduate, but who has a certain level of appreciation of broader issues and whose ethical conduct is high. So we should start emphasizing things that matter. High ethical conduct. And how do you measure that? People should be ethically cleared. So this whole concept of corruption...
People should be ethically cleared?
Yes. I would rather have my MP have an ethical clearance than an academic clearance.
From Father Lokodo.
You
get the certificate.
Certificate. I mean, they go everywhere and get these certificates and so on and so forth. So I think we are so much legalistic in our way of fighting corruption, and we are undermining the fundamentals. And on the issues of incentives, actually, there is a lot of corruption at the level of legislation, which is silent. When we see certain laws in place, it's helpful to find out whose ideas does it seem to persuade, to influence, to promote. We only see it in terms of bribes and so on. Okay. But even in terms of the incentives that you're talking about, when we look at the beneficiaries and those that are being excluded, it will point to the extent to which it can spur.
No, but
okay, gentlemen, hold on to your points, gentlemen, because we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we shall open the line so that you too can be a part of this discussion. We'll be right back. Okay, gentlemen, we're back on air. Welcome back. You watch On the Spot. And my guest tonight are Mr. Abubakar Mayanjo, is an economist, with Patrick Ayota from NSSF, and Professor Gerard Karije from Uganda Management Institute. I'll be opening the lines shortly so that you two can be a part of this discussion. But if I may look at the issue of multinational firms, they are now relying on sophisticated methods such as under-declaring, transfer pricing, tax evasion, to siphon money into tax havens and secret jurisdictions. How can the local industry survive and remain competitive in such hostile environment?
I've always said one of the things that I think we didn't do as a country, I think we opened up too quickly. I think this whole privatization that we undertook as a country, we did it a bit too early. There is, I know Mr. Manager will tell me that what you need is a free market to make the markets grow. The problem is if you're competing, if you're a child and you're competing against a bigger brother, a bigger child, and you don't have some kind of protection to allow you mature, you're going to die. And that's what we saw in Uganda, the industries died. And part of it is exactly that. The multinationals are very sophisticated. I mean, they have all the systems, they have all the laws. As a country, sometimes we don't even have the capacity to be able to find out what these guys have done. It's very difficult. Now, if you try to compete against that and there's nothing, for example, we have the Kira bus that we want to set up. Now, the question I would ask is, why would any bus operator buy the Kira bus if you can buy a Tata from India? So if you open it up and just allow the Tatas to come.
But will Kira compete with even India?
That's my point. He won't, on his own, it won't compete. Now, what should the government do to help Kira develop? Does it need some protection? Do they need some subsidies, some incentives to make it work? And maybe that's what is needed to basically nurture the nascent industries.
Abubakar, quite a number of Ugandans have some money. In fact, we have a term called, for example, the Kwagalana Group. They put the money into buildings, for example. If you go to downtown, people have built a lot of shopping arcades, maybe 5 or 10 stories up. But in some cases, even some of those stories up, they are even empty. How can we entice people with money to maybe start cottage industries, factories, and invest in productive areas so that they can make more money than just into real estate?
Yeah, it always comes down to the cost of capital and also the nurturing of value chains. The Kwagalana groups you talk of have had some bad experiences when they do this. For example, there's one who started a ginning factory.
Yes.
I think you might be aware. Mr. Sevalama, I think, at one point, and he cried for help because you need entire value chains. Industrialization is not easy. Like Mr. Ayota was not saying, for me, for Africa, we can no longer say we are going to copy East Asia by going export orientation, because I'm talking about Uganda, of the challenge we have with logistics and getting goods to market and the cost of power, and then also the level of development. Then, number two, we cannot also go Brazil import substitution. Our natural advantage is in natural resources. For example, the oil and gas sector might double our GDP, but remember there are over 200 derivatives of oil. I'm talking about synthetic industries.
Yeah.
Where I disagree a bit on the privatization, again, I'll go back to history. And we can use just one example. Most of those parastatals were part of the hemorrhage. The hemorrhage you are talking about, if they were still there, instead of 3.6, it could be more. This privatization enabled private capital to flow in. And this is not a policy we can reverse. I will give some very specific examples that what we need to do is encourage more FDI. But instead of companies just coming here on their own, we do like what Quality Chemicals did, mergers. For example, Quality Chemicals partnered with Cipla, and look what has become of it. It's now a listed company. Cipla already had licenses, intellectual property, and then Quality Chemicals had shown some maturity by developing. That's number one. The second policy might be around taxation. You see, there are people who invest as financial investors, like NSSF, like venture capital funds, like private equity funds. In Nairobi, when those companies invest, when they are going to liquidate, they do not get a hit of 45% of capital gains tax. They have a different treatment. That's what we are missing. In other words, for me, as I know this is a developing country, the binding constraint is capital and know-how. We don't have all the answers. Look at, for example, what MTN did when it came. Who knew how to run a mobile in Uganda? But look at how many people are employed there. Look at how many other industries have mushroomed out of that. FDI, for us, is a lifeline. And why do I say that? We have a current account deficit that if we do not attract capital, this economy would collapse overnight. And sometimes when you see government bending low for foreign investors, it's because we really need that money to flow in a practical way, USD.
Okay.
So
now,
to get our people, we need to do mergers, we need to encourage them to have
We're expecting to get about $20 billion into the Albertine region, into the oil sector. But up to now, majority of those people have not made their final investment decision.
Yeah.
Do you really think that, you guys, are you convinced that they will make that decision soon? Because that's when we can have real money.
Where I disagree with him is to make an assumption that our problem is capital. Capital, Colin Powell says capital is a coward. It will flee any place that it thinks is not secure for it. Our issue as a country is, you talk about accountability, fiscal discipline. Let's as a country
Capital is
become
afraid
that.
of Uganda, Mr. Yota, is it?
That's why it's so expensive. You have to.
What is it in this country that can make?
As long as we have indiscipline, we have fiscal indiscipline. We've got high taxes. We have got things that make us uncompetitive. So the guy thinks twice. Okay, should I take my money in Kenya or take it to Uganda?
So how do you get some of those examples that are centers of excellence, like quality chemicals? How come we have those?
No, we have. In a desert, you'll find an oasis.
Quality chemicals.
We also need to
Quality chemicals.
Let me have Professor
zero on them a little bit. I am a statist. We shall not industrialize by not doing what those who industrialized did. We cannot roll back the state to the farthest end and we expect that foreign capital will do certain investments. It will not.
This is a private sector-led economy.
You know, you cannot have a private sector-led economy. Actually, we claim we are having a private sector-led economy.
That's fully dependent on the
But
government.
if we do that, then look at our private sector, both actually even foreign capital and local capital. Most of it is reliant on
government.
On government. So I would rather we do a balance. There are certain heavy investments beyond. Actually, government can also industrialize. Look at the work that UPDF is doing. If you go to Makerere, the current where they played recent games, there's a sports facility there. The army, for example, getting involved into construction, into production. Look at the work which is being, if you could scale up what the prisons is doing in terms of agricultural production. I am one of those who do not hold by the idea that government is a very poor businessman.
Exactly.
You can have government-run enterprises. You know, when we look at the US and so on,
but we have
the
so many
military industrial
examples of their
complex,
failure.
the military industrial
one
complex
question for you, would they regulate themselves? Let me give a very practical example. Let's say we have a regulator like UCC, and we are both running telcos. So will government regulate its own company the same way to regulate the private sector? But anyway, I'm not entirely disagreeing with you, Professor Kareja. There have been instances when government does certain investments in circumstances, indeed economics provides for that, where, for example, let's go to your area, Muko, the steel, the iron. It's a strategic industry. If private sector hasn't developed it since independence, that's 50 years. You have a clear case there for government taking that in partnership with the man with the
Our
money.
So,
Mr. Kamara, there are no absolutes. What we learned out of the financial crisis was that government still has a role to play, but it can be pervasive. In Uganda, the policy direction should be around competition law and a protection of intellectual property. If Professor Kareja, out of his own volition, comes up with a new idea, we should have the laws to protect him, and that will spur. But I will not agree with anybody who doesn't know the importance of capital. Why? The production function, the Cobb-Douglas production function, has knowledge, capital, and labor. And according to the INADA conditions, if you miss one of those, your production is zero.
Gentlemen, quite a number of Ugandans would want to participate in this discussion, and they've been trying to reach us by telephone. So let me open the line, at least we get one or two people, so that we get to know what they are thinking.
Hello.
Good evening, sir.
How are you?
How are you? What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hello.
Good evening, sir. You're on air. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Gayaza.
Yes.
And I heard you have... I'm James.
Go right ahead, sir. Don't listen to an echo which is in
okay.
the background.
a gentleman from NSSF.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask him, okay.
You don't
He's
listen to
talking about
yourself. Just
accountability.
continue, sir.
Yeah. I'm one of the former employees of Uganda Post and Telecommunications.
Mm-hmm.
They are holding our money. They cannot give an explanation why you cannot get our benefits. Some of our colleagues have died. The wives cannot access the money. I don't understand when he talks about accountability. Why can't we get our money? Can he answer that, sure?
You got him today. Okay.
Actually,
okay, yeah, you are going to respond to that question. I am trying to get maybe two more so that we can respond to those issues at once. I have a caller online. Hello. Okay. Hello. Hello. I have a call online. Hello. Okay. Probably maybe you can.
James, just to give you an assurance is one, I think the case you're mentioning is actually in court, so we can't quite talk about it that much. But it's not court between you as a saver and NSSF. It's actually in court because the case between UTL, the old telecom, and NSSF. And the reason why we're in court is NSSF is actually trying to protect your money so that it can give it to you. Now, that matter, as soon as the court settle it, then all members will get their money. But it originated a long time ago,
okay,
and that was the matter. That came
all right, sir, from Gayaza, I suppose they have answered you. Let me try to take another caller online. And,
hello.
Good evening, sir. What's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm Byron calling from Zambia.
Okay, go right ahead, sir. You're on air.
I'm asking and inform you that the biggest challenge is ethical kwashako in our leaders. There is nothing beyond that because they have all that it takes to make Uganda a better place for us.
Ethical kwashako. That's a new one. Okay. Maybe I'm going to take one more. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Good evening, sir. What's your name and where you're calling from?
I'm called Samuel, calling from Fort Portal.
Samuel in Fort Portal, you're on air, sir.
I'm Samuel calling from Fort Portal.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Kama, for the program, and I'm glad to listen to the gentleman. But one thing I would like to ask first. We do have some brains, people who are not in position to put up proposals that have good ideas like businesses, and we fail to be supported by our own leaders. And that business, even if someone so looked into it, it has a very big impact that it can bring to the economy. But you reach out because you don't have the capital to put up the proposal well, or to initiate a proposal, you are left out. How can they advise on even the people down on the grassroots to find a way out to access the finances, maybe for the good proposals to be initiated?
Thank you very much, our caller from Fort Portal, Samuel. Okay, maybe Abubakar could respond
to Byron about people who have proposals.
Yes.
Yeah, there is now access to capital through many areas. It's not an easy road, and even the price. But one area is microfinance support center, but it's lending itself to agriculture at the moment, but can also support cottage industries. They have sufficient capital, well priced. The government also created the ACP, which is for the agriculture sector and processing. Then we have the Yield Fund, which is 20 billion, which is a partnership between the NSSF and the European Union. And that one, their challenge is a policy challenge because they are financial investors. If they get out of the investment, they lose 45% because of capital gains tax. So we've been advocating with the Minister of Finance to differentiate between an entrepreneur selling his industry and a financial investor
who actually allows that investment to happen. So I would advise that gentleman to visit the nearest branch of the Microfinance Support Center. I believe they will be able. But if it's a very huge project, then he has to go to the Uganda Development Bank.
Okay. Yeah. Our time is almost out. Beginning with you, Professor Kareja, your concluding remark on the show tonight.
My concluding remark is that as long as people who have money to invest feel that corruption in a number of ways limits their ability to get profit or a good return, they will not bring their capital. But at the same time, the state cannot run away from its responsibility to not only create an enabling environment, but also to be a player in industrializing this country.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick Ayota.
I think we go back to that thing that we all owe this country a duty and a responsibility to develop it. And I think if we can be accountable at each of at the levels we're in, whether at the village level, at political level, that when you see something wrong, we actually try to hold our leaders accountable. The day we honor this country that much, people will begin to make the right decisions for the country.
Thank you, Mr. Barker.
For me, my appeal would be that we have to look again at how much money we spend that is not productive. That 1 billion a year irks me a little bit, but I don't have all the information to know why we spend that kind of money. When it goes to farms, institutions, research institutes like Uganda Industrial Research Institute, National Agricultural Research Organization, then policy like EPRC, we should fund them well. And then the last point would be, if you want to create industrialization, there has to be a fiscal side, like the SEZ intervention, but also monetary side, the price of money. And then for the NSSF, maybe 2 to 3% in industrial projects, and then maybe another 4 to 5% in infrastructure projects, whether they be at the public level or provided they come through certain instruments.
Mr. Bakar Mayanja, Mr. Patrick Ayota, and Professor Jared Kareja, thank you very much. We appreciate your insights on the matter. And the Economic Summit for 2018 will be held on the 28th of November here at the Serena Conference Center. You can be a part of this, at least you listen, because we intend to have the policy makers and the policy analysts, the economists, the legislators, and those who are managing the economy of our country. So be a part of that, at least by listening to it and to the summit and whoever will be speaking, so that you get to know where we are and where we are headed. Thank you very much, gentlemen, once again, and all of you have been a part of this discussion. Good night and God bless Uganda.
Good night.